Well, a reminder of our top stories. Federal government shuts down a Kenya train station in Edo State after gunmen kidnapped scores of passengers. One suspect arrested.
Police neutralized 2 gun runners in Zamfara State, transporting 3 live shells, rocket-propelled grenades, and 200 rounds of ammunition for anti-aircraft rifle.
Petrol scarcity hits Port Harcourt, the River State capital, as fuel now sells for 500 naira per litre. Motor is grown under massive price hike. Plus,
Black Sunday in Senegal as 40 people are killed in a head-on collision involving 2 buses. President Macky Sall declares 2 days of mourning.
Well, thanks again for joining us. Well, last week, President Muhammadu Buhari wrote a letter to the 2 chambers of the National Assembly seeking approval for the advance of 23 trillion naira from the Central Bank of Nigeria's Ways and Means. Well, many have criticized the amount of money the Buhari administration has borrowed from the CBN. Well, 22.7 trillion through Ways and Means. Well, this would leave a total public debt stock of 77 trillion naira for the next administration. The Central Bank Act provides that the government should not borrow more than 5% of the previous budget from the CBN, and such loan has to be repaid before next budget cycle.
Okay, we'll be discussing, Amaka, the issues surrounding the CBN loan, including the proposed securitization and whether the National Assembly should approve the request from the President. And looking at these issues and more, Arise analyst Dr. Sam Amadi joins us now. Thanks very much, Sam. Well, I can just see you squeezing that smile, trying to put it. I mean, when anybody hears the debt profile, 77 trillion, the ways and means of 23 trillion, saying securitization, and there has been a kind of negation of the laws of the CBN. Don't borrow more than 5% of the budget, and it must be repaid back within that budget year. Where are we headed, Sam?
I think the first point is that we've seen maybe a strategic breach of its law by the central bank. I mean, that lends to federal government.
Couldn't the central bank have said no?
Of course, it ought to have, because the idea of the central bank is an independent institution. That's the central bank amendment done in 2004, I think, under former central bank governor Charles Oludo, was to ensure the independence of central bank in managing monetary policy. And so, generally all over the world, the central bank is not wedded to the government. It has to be independent, and that is a trick. The reason for that is because the central bank could provide some policies that help a government momentarily and endanger the next government, or even endanger, public goods down the line. Now, the government has borrowed up to this amount of money, and so first the question is: can the central bank, can the National Assembly approve the securitization? Of course, it's a common practice in financial institutions to use it to take off for the balance sheet. So the idea here is, if you securitize the debt into bonds and all that, then prospective investors buy at a premium. And then it's a sense saying, the government is saying, you know what, investors come and buy. They have packaged, it's a repackaging. They have packaged those debts into security instruments that investors, using the SPV, that the issuer now, the originator, who is now the central bank, who holds that debt somebody's owing you, then it allows it to sell it to investors. The investors are going to, let's say 50 billion now, they can buy it for 30 billion, and then you're going to pay them down the line 50 billion, and that with interest. Now, what it does for you is that if it's a company, you take it out of your balance sheet. So look at the book, that debt, you don't own that debt anymore, but it has now become, someone has bought it over with a premium interest you're going to be paying. Now, this helps the government, for example, so if they securitize it, it's not a debt. Instead of government being the one borrowing, somebody else has bought over that, and the government...
At a cheaper rate.
Cheaper rate. That means we're going to pay. Now, because Nigeria's rating is very almost junk now, bad rating, it means that they're going to send at a premium. And that adds, if you look at it, will impact on our debt services to revenue, even our debt to GDP ratio. So that's one aspect of it. The second, and the reason why the Central Bank Act, Section 38, I think 2B, prohibits, says if you're going to borrow ways and means from the government, from the central bank, you can't do more than 5% of your budget. So in a sense, creating fiscal stability and balance, your budget not more than 5%. And within that budgetary cycle that year, you have to pay it off. So it's like momentary cash constraint. You borrow, you pay off. Now, if you don't do that, so this CCBN Act tries to protect that fiscal stability by saying, don't do this. Now, what they're trying to do is now, and it expressly says you can't securitize. So with the National Assembly exercising its legislative power, authorize the presidency, the federal government of Nigeria, to securitize these loans and violate the Central Bank Act and risk further damaging Nigeria's rating, even though tactically it helps to kind of move this off, off CBN's,
well, that's you're talking about the long run, because Dr. Sam, the reason why this is quite concerning is the fact that, some would say being a debtor as a nation is not a bad idea, because the United States is the highest debtor in the world. But of course, the impact of such debt is what most Nigerians are concerned about. And Doyin Salami, who is a member of the Monetary Policy Committee, had actually criticized the CBN's massive injection of cash into the economy, saying the CBN becoming the piggy bank for the government is against its own rules. And even, the IMF just in November had warned the CBN against its continued financing of the deficit of Nigeria's budget. It says it has negative implications on inflation. But the question is, if the government is not going to the CBN, what other alternative sources do they have to get these loans domestically now?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. Now, first is, if government cannot have to go to the CBN because probably it's easier to borrow for the central bank, being the bank of last resort, using the ways and means. But again, the question is, if you look at appropriation, don't forget that when Governor Obaseki raised a law that central bank was printing money, literally, to finance this expenditure. First, misappropriation. How are you sure that these funds were used? We didn't know about it. There was no transparency as to
in fact, the acquisition of the funds are the
money. So this was like secret transactions, quote unquote. So first, you don't know what they were used for. They could be used for personnel, avoidable personnel costs. They could have been used, misappropriated, and misapplied. So the problem with this kind of transaction is both that it fits into a pattern of corruption. It also does not, like when they say America is a debtor country, you have to benchmark on three things. One, what are you using debt for? Two, what is the size of your economy to sustain some of the buffers, some of the crises. You see, if you look at the American fiscal crisis, which sometimes leads to threat of government shutdown and increasing the debt threshold, they are more like maintaining macroeconomic stability. On top, the amount of debt and life, inflation, a spike in inflation, we want to have today, with very eroded, real income of workers that's not improving, with unemployment very high, you are risking a lot. So that's why the primary focus, fundamentals of both fiscal and monetary policy are threefold. One is achieving and sustaining full employment. Second is ensuring, economic growth. And again, maintaining fiscal stability in the sense that you can control all this. So what we are seeing now is that in the past, the government has been reckless in coercing or attracting beyond express provision of law. The 5% threshold is sensible in both law and economically makes sense. You cannot borrow from a central bank so much more than almost triple, 4 times more than your budget for the year. And now you have a problem. You can't have those in the balance sheet of CBN. You need to pay them that year. And because you can't pay them, you repackage them and sell them as security to investors so that it's out of that book. So the central bank would technically not be in default, so to say, because their books don't have it again. It's now seen as so investors have that, and Nigeria, they pay you, and you down the line you pay 50 years or whatever. You're going to pay the tenure. You're going to pay the interest rate, which is usually higher. So the question is first is that this is an irresponsible and illegal transaction in a sense, because the law is clear. Secondly, the National Assembly shouldn't, in exercising due diligence and prudence, reward breach of its status. They created a law. And the question I would have is, what would the National Assembly do? Do they conduct a hearing?
Sam, the president of the Senate and chairman of the National Assembly, he has said that they are going to look at it, I mean, to economists, to financial experts, and to the majority of Nigerians. How are they going to redress this 77 trillion?
And this is kicking the can down the road. So, of course, the DMO DG said that, look, this is estimated what it come to, with this new Securitization, everything comes. Again, he says, look, he tries to make a case that this is federal, state, and over the year. But primarily, the problem here is that you're kicking the can down the road. Now, we are already in trouble. So one can argue that Securitization may be the only way out to help, clear this from the book, but you have not solved the problem. You are increasing our debt profile. Right. You are increasing our debt to debt service to revenue. You are also, feeding into inflation. You are also making it possible for default. Look, even the government is going to give them premium interest, interest rate, the fear is that the government can default down the line, and that will further make our rating worse than junk.
Absolutely.
As at this point now, our rating is terrible, and all this builds into damaging the prospect in terms of fiscal policy, in terms of
and even beyond that, the business environment in Nigeria is also suffering from that.
And the question is the illegality and the impunity. Why should we first not have put this on the public searchlight? Why didn't the National Assembly has already approved 1.something trillion for the part of the budget? Now, all this loan probably should have come under greater scrutiny, and then that would have helped us to know whether we actually needed to exceed that threshold for good reason, or
if it was necessary for that to have
Absolutely.
happened. Even the World Bank had said that, the sizable fiscal deficit financing by the CBN is part of the reasons that we're seeing, slow growth when it concerns businesses in Nigeria.
Absolutely.
We have to do better.
Absolutely.
But Dr. Sam Amadi, we have to say thank you so much for joining us tonight and helping us unpack, the numbers.